phenomenon is taking on very strange ramifications. I just flew back Wednesday evening from a business trip in Chicago, and I was walking through O'Hare Airport, and I saw this guy came up to me. He looked kind of ratty, you know, maybe he was a little panhandling, and he wanted to sell me a cup of coffee for $20. I looked at this man and I said, $20 for a cup of coffee, are you out of your mind? And his response was, don't tell me how to run my business. Do you want to buy it or don't? And that's really what we're all about here. There are no right ways to run the business. We're going to talk about a lot of the things that have begun to emerge in the whole space that we call e-commerce, e-business. And it really is an area that is changing quite rapidly. But there is a myth. And that myth is that you develop an e-business, you just have to create a website. That's all that's involved, and automatically you're in e-business. And that really is not what it's all about. Matter of fact, I saw this, and I sort of like it, particularly given the geographic part of the country we're in. And as you can all tell by now, I'm a native to Tampa, right, with this accent. But basically, you know, e-business is sort of like paving cow paths. It's a great idea. And it's something that we need to do, but just adding an E to your business does not make it so. It does not make it something workable. And if you know, that whole concept of the E-path, anybody about our cow path, how many of you have ever had an opportunity to drive through Boston, downtown Boston? Anybody ever done that? Well, for those of you who haven't, it's probably one of the most frustrating places in the world to try to drive an automobile. There are no blocks, things just Miranda. And why that happened is exactly what they did was they paved old cow paths in downtown Boston. And it becomes a very, very frustrating experience. But this whole phenomenon, the dot, you know, never before has such an ubiquitous thing taken on so much meaning. But the dot has really only come to existence in the last 5 years as a concept. But don't be misled. The web is 31 years old. And how I know that, it was brought poignantly home to me last year on my birthday when they were announcing it was its 31st birthday on the 2nd of September. And that was when the first start of what now became the web came into being. So this concept has been around for a long time, but the manifestation that we see today only took 5 years. But put in perspective, the button. A common button. We all touched one today, I'm sure. 13th century invention took over 400 years to achieve widespread use. It does make you wonder what they were using as an alternative, but it took over 400 years to take on. The bicycle, 50 years to catch on. Telephone, 35 years. The television, 26 years. And believe it or not, the PC has been around for over 16 years. But yet, in less than 5 years, we have changed the way we're doing business. This is sort of the evolution of the e-business revolution. And we started off in the very early stages. The first generation, we'll talk about this in a second, is what is known as brochureware. We've evolved into, around 1997, into the term e-commerce. We're now starting to talk about terms like e-business, and ultimately we're going to start talking about terms called e-enterprises, and what does that all mean? Brochureware really is nothing more than taking printed material, literature about your company, and putting it out on a web page. The actual conducting of business is still done in the more traditional fashion. Somebody picked up a phone, or they might have gone to the facility to buy it. But people did brochureware. We're doing e-business. Just before we go any further, let me get a sampling here. How many of you in the room today are engaged in classic retail type of operations? Buying and selling to a consumer, one individual. How many of you are engaged in what would be called a business-to-business type of relationship? You're providing product or service to other businesses. And then the third area, because I do know Michael, is more in the area of community relations, nonprofit. It's a little bit more ubiquitous. How many involved there? All right. So we have a wide scattering of individuals. And what we'll come to find out is the technology and the theories and the practices are the same. What changes is the end customer and some of the expectations. on that interaction. E-commerce has been focused on consumer applications, really. I mean, that's been the stuff that's gotten the most attention. Not where the most money is, as we saw earlier today, but the most visible from an attention point of view is the concept of B2B, B2C rather, which is the interaction between a company and the consumer over the internet. How many of you did do some part of your Christmas shopping last year over the internet? Let's prove it. That's a new business model designed specifically for the purposes of buying and selling between consumers and online, and it really takes on the term e-tailing when you get done with it. And some classic examples of that besides Amazon, eBay, one more commercial with William Shatner doing Priceline.com, and we all know what that is at this point in time. But it really is that transaction between you, the individual consumer, and the business. Now, there are other e-tailing operations that are less obvious. Anybody do online trading of the stock market through Schwab or any of the other type of facilities? Well, that really is still a business-to-consumer retail type of transaction. It does talk about some areas we'll talk about later about removing some of the waste in the system, some of the friction that has historically been in some of these transactions to what we call disintermediation. Business to business, on the other hand, is really allowing transaction between companies. And the truth of the matter is the most successful of these B2B operations, and those of you who are in those today, really what you're doing is you're extending a brick and mortar facility. And in most cases, what you're probably doing is looking at things like speeding up delivery and servicing of your customer needs, inventory management, and supply chain types of issues. You're still delivering a physical good to satisfy a business partner's need, but you're trying to, again, remove some of the friction, some of the inefficiencies from the system. And that's the state of the art today. It's not that we will ultimately end up, but we're still in a relatively immature life cycle. The whole value chain, from procurement of raw materials on the supply side to the meeting of a customer's needs, happens by a combination of this brick and mortar, and now when you add cyber, another buzzword, cyber technology or cyber media, we've created a whole new paradigm, the click and mortar type of environment, where you still have the infrastructure of a physical facility and the click of the internet being brought together. There is an argument, and we talked earlier about Amazon.com and about its potential long-term viability. And when you look at, say, its market capitalization at its high point, and it has almost halved in value of late, but at its high point, and look at what it was doing from a business perspective, there's not a single person in this room that would run or could run your business the way Amazon did or does. Amazon has to date ever turned a profit. How many of you could be in this room today running a business that never turned a profit? None of you. Why does it survive? It has survived on a promise of a profit. Now what we're beginning to see happen is the investing community, if we operate on the premise of the efficient use of capital or capital for efficient marketplaces, people who put money in, many of you sitting in this room have invested money in companies like Amazon, with the expectation of receiving a return on that investment. Well, the thing that will drive that return in the long run is a profitable company. If the company isn't profitable, it's not driving a return, you become impatient, you begin to look for other places to put your capital. And that's what we're beginning to see. And I think my own personal belief is we're at the very beginnings of what could be massive carnage in this whole space in the market. Because the markets are not receiving the capital return that they're expecting or desire, and will begin to go to other places. Enterprise is fundamentally, at the end of the day, about engineering and re-engineering your business processes and trying to leverage the web or the net. You just can't go to the net and solve it. Rather, it's looking how you conduct business and where the internet web pages or any of the other types of touch points between your constituency, where that can be leveraged to become more efficient, more effective. So there are no magic bullets here. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have a good, sound business. You have to have a fundamentally established business. You have to know why you're in business and what you're doing. Then look at where you can bring the technology of the web, of the net, to bear to make it more efficient, make it more effective. So, I mean, there are a lot of people running out there thinking if I go to the web page, they will come. And I'll have a successful business. Well, that isn't the case. You need really a good basic fundamental business to start with, and then you move out with the web of technology. You go the other way, it will be an interesting ride, but albeit a short one, I promise you. It's also far more than technology. You know, XML, Corba, Java. That's the technology of the moment, and I guarantee you in 3 years it will be a new technology. It really is a way of transforming your enterprise from a bricks and mortar, from this physical, I have to go, or the consumer has to come to me, or my business trading partner, I have to move stuff, to try to find ways to make it more enabled with the web. So as we go through this, think in your own minds, how do I conduct business today in my organization? And where are there opportunities? Where do they lie that maybe I can get some efficiency by streamlining some things? And that's really what this is all about at the end of the day. You know, I was talking to somebody just before the session, the company I work for, Corporate Systems. The current model, how many of you have heard the term ASP, Application Service Provider? That's the current buzzword. Well, I've been an ASP, or my company has been an ASP for 33 years. Of course, when we started off, we called it a service bureau. It's just a different set of words for the same business model. So one begins to believe we really haven't reinvented much of anything new here. We've applied some technology to enable some things, but still at the bottom, at the end of the day, fundamentally, you had to have a sound business and a service. There had to be a need, and you had to have the ability to fulfill a need and have a business. The rest of it's an enablement. Now, transformation to e-business is virtually inevitable. We're seeing it happen. And I saw this quote from Wellington after the Battle of Waterloo. And you know, you can substitute a couple of words here if you so desire, but at the end of the day, I thought this was really kind of neat. And I may actually have it made up and hung in my office. But for every problem, there is a solution, he said. But where there is no solution, you have no problem. You only have fact. That's it. Accept it. And on some of this stuff, as we move forward, accept some issues where there are no solutions. What you're dealing with is a fact, and you need to just accept that as a foundational basis on how you're going to conduct your business and move forward. Again, the net isn't just about setting up a World Wide Web. It's really about realigning your business models, about some cases you can go global, but let's face it, you know, this whole global marketplace, if you're selling retail goods here in Amarillo, I don't know how effective and how competitive you're going to be selling those same goods in Taiwan. And the net is not necessarily going to provide you an access to expand your market. It may provide an access to make the transactions smoother here locally or within your community of business, but it's not necessarily going to open you up to a global economy, particularly for most of us whose businesses are based around some physical item that I'm selling. I mean, I don't care how effective, how pretty, how beautiful your web page is, but if you're selling tires in Amarillo, Texas, you're not going to displace a tire sales company in Waco. It's just not going to happen. So understand what the nature of your business is and what you're providing, and then learn how to leverage that technology in the best way to compete. Again, there is a transformation going on. We talked about it in the earlier slides. From e-commerce to the e-business into e-enterprises. Many refer to the transformation, you'll hear this as e-transformation. As you can see, if you put enough E's and enough dots in there, you can do an IPO next week. And that these organizations that were successful in making this transformation and leveraging their asset base to deploy in this model will be more effective going forward. Because there is no doubt the web or web technology is going to become far more ubiquitous. We are going to see it as a standard way of conducting business in the times to come. It is going to become the new model. In the same way that the automobile replaced the horse and buggy, the net is going to replace, in many cases, some of the more traditional structures of conducting business we have come comfortable with. How many of you have ever gone out to one of these virtual shopping malls? All the stores and more that are out west of town in one location. Now, you may not actually buy, and we'll talk a little later on, but it becomes a real interesting research facility, or depending on what you want to buy. E-business, repositioning brands and the company. The first area of that is really, and we've talked about this, is cannibalizing distribution channels through disintermediation. What does that mean besides having a bunch of words that if you've had a couple of glasses of wine too early into the evening and you have this discussion, you can't get them out. But what does it really mean? It means that we change the interaction. A classic example that I use is the travel industry. What is happening to the classic travel agents? What has Priceline.com done to that travel agent? It has basically disintermediated them out of business. And those travel agencies that are surviving are redefining their business. They are redefining what business they're in and who their customers are. Because for most people, it is no longer necessary to call the local travel agent to make travel arrangements. You can get on the web. You can get on the web directly to an airline if you so desire and make all of the arrangements you need. That is what is meant by disintermediation. People that had a role in the supply chain or the commerce chain for a number of years, their role has, if not gone away, has fundamentally changed and needs to be readdressed into the entire system. Establishing new markets on the net through re-intermediation. Again, third glass of wine, this gets more difficult. But what does that mean? It means that the web creates new opportunities for new people to enter the commerce chain and create new markets. Again, using that analogy of the travel. Priceline.com originally started off as what? Bid for your cheap ticket. Tell us how much you want to pay for an airline fare, as long as you don't care how you get there and how many bags of mail you're asked to carry en route to deliver it. If we get to that number, you can have the ticket. Now they've expanded. They've re-intermediated. Now they say not only get your airline ticket, but book your automobile, your hotel room. You can do it all. So they've expanded further and further out. So they're re-intermediating. They're changing their marketplace. Segmenting the needs of customers. The net provides a vehicle where you can segment. And we'll talk about this later, about communities of interest. And you can begin to bring the net together to use this to help you within your business to target. And when you're standing out there as a standalone business, brick and mortar in the middle of nowhere, or in the middle of I-40 or wherever you may be, you're open to the world, but you're not targeted necessarily. And depending on the name of your company, it may not be clear who your target audience is. Matter of fact, I work for a company who is a classic representation whose name means absolutely nothing. It tells the consumer nothing about what we do, but it was done for a reason back 30 years ago. The name of the company is Corporate Systems. That tells you all what we do, right? Everybody in this room now knows what this company is all about. Matter of fact, many of you have grown up in this town. This company has been in Amarillo for 30 years. You have no idea what we do you? You just know it's a bunch of buildings on Ross Street. And many of you know our founder, Guy Saunders. But that's all you know about us. Well, that name was purposely chosen 30 years ago because what we were doing was displacing internal IS organizations within our customers. And in those days, outsourcing was not a real popular thing to do. So it was a lot easier when we sent the bill in, and it said corporate systems, $20,000 for the month, and they brought it up to accounting. Accounting thought those were the guys on the 6th floor. They didn't think it was some external company. Now today we sit here and we have an identity crisis. Because when customers go out looking, or potential prospects or customers of ours go out looking for companies like us, the name corporate systems doesn't ring any bells. So sometimes you've got to rethink. As the web is redefining. And when you start getting into the world of web and segmenting customer needs, search engines, and these engines that use keywords to look for things, all of a sudden, how you call yourself, what you call yourself, takes on a whole new meaning. There's not just somebody driving by and seeing gyms. Gyms what? Everybody in town might know gyms was, Jim Smith, who had his great little company doing these things, but on the web it doesn't mean anything. So how do you segment your customers is also part of what e-business is about. It also means, believe it or not, in this whole area of mass communication, that's what the web is, the world is open. It also means marketing products one-to-one. How many of you have bought something at Amazon? More than once. Have you filled out the profile the first time? The next time you come in and you enter your password and your ID, you get greeted in a very personal fashion. We'll talk about this a little later on, but what this is an attempt to do is recreate commerce of the 1800s. When you went into your corner store and that merchant knew you by name, knew what you liked. Matter of fact, if it was a bookstore, they might have called you, or in the 1800s they probably call you, but would go over and talk to you and say, in the past you liked the works of Pickens. We just got a new Pickens novel. We thought maybe you'd be interested in reading. Now, in the interim period, that doesn't happen when you go into Barnes & Noble, into the retail store. You walk in and you browse, but you do not have that personal experience. So one of the things people are trying to do in the e-business space is create this one-to-one experience, really recreate a bygone day. Sort of ironic with all this modern technology. We're trying to recreate something that goes back 60, 70 years ago. I know when I first came to this town just about 4 years ago, one of the things that fascinated me is I came from Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles, I'm just a person coming in, and they just want to know how quickly they can get the money out of my pocket and make room for the next person. When I first came to Amarillo, it always amazed me that I walk into a store for the first time, and again, figuring that maybe they thought I wasn't a local. The next question will be, well, where are you from? Why are you here? It was an attempt by the merchant in many cases to get to know me as an individual, to establish a one-to-one relationship. Well, that still goes on to a certain degree here in Amarillo, though it's becoming less and less frequent as we grow. But you go to other parts of the country, it doesn't happen, period. The web is trying to recreate, or some people are trying to recreate that experience. And it empowers the customer with self-service at the end of the day, by allowing you to make decisions without you necessarily being dependent upon somebody else. I mean, one of the individuals here today is in the business of creating web pages. Does it predominantly for auto dealerships. Now, we all know what a wonderful experience it is to go to buy an automobile, right? We all love that. That sort of ranks up for me somewhere between a root canal and, for those of you not too far out of school yet, put down what we're going to have a pop quiz type of thing. Real pleasant experience. Well, what a lot of is going on here is empowering the customer to go out and shop at their own leisure, make some comparisons, get some information. And the interesting thing that's happening is this is another example where the role of the auto dealership is changing. How many of you have bought a new vehicle in the last year or so? Have you used a facility we've gone out, done your research beforehand, and walked into the dealer and said, I don't care, this is what I want, how much? No longer, no, I don't want you to test drive, no, I don't want to hear about the undercoating option or anything else, this is what I want. So this is all beginning to change the way we do business, and it needs for you to think about your businesses and how you conduct, how you begin to leverage this and what this means. Because if you choose not to web enable, if you will, or enter into e-commerce today, and that's a legitimate business choice to make, you do need to know what does that mean vis-a-vis your competitor who might, and how does that change your positioning in the marketplace. And again, finally, building communities of interest to promote goods and services. Dr. Anwar said earlier, you know, he goes to Amazon, he checks on a book, and what do? They tell him, gee, well, you just clicked on this book. Other people who have exhibited the same interest have also been interested in these sets of books. It's trying to create a community interest. Matter of fact, if you go there, they'll even give you reviews, not from, you know, the New York Times book critic, but by Marc Sollosy of Amarillo, who took the time to read the book and said, right, wonderful read, couldn't put it down, your page has turned itself. So it gives you an opportunity to develop a shared community of interest. I think this is where we left off. Yes. Fundamental question. Why do companies that are already successful selling products via more traditional services, why do they feel the need to sell the wares online? Is it just pressure? Is it a Me Too attitude? A fear that if I don't? I mean, all of these things do come into play. I'm afraid to touch this one next. What does the net do? This is what we talk about. It allows businesses to interact personally and directly with their customers without incurring a lot of overhead. I mean, if you try to do that in a traditional retail environment, particularly, what happens? If you want to expand your reach, at some point you have to do what? Either enlarge your facility or open another facility somewhere else. I mean, let's take a restaurant or McDonald's. No matter how much McDonald's wants to improve their reach or expand it, at some point they have to open another one somewhere else. Because people are only going to go so far to go there. And if there's too much distance between you and it, you'll find an alternative one. That explains why I'm in Amarillo alone. There are how many McDonald's? Because people are only willing to go so far. But for other types of businesses, you can very much expand your reach, expand the number of people who have access to you and you who have access to them by, in essence, of setting up a website. But, again, it's not just involving the customer. It needs to also change the way your processes work and your employees work. We talked about it earlier today. All these companies that went to the web for Christmas and allowed you to order things over the web for Christmas. But they hadn't modified their processes. They hadn't changed their employee behavior, so it didn't work. Amazon was a classic case. When Amazon first came into business, they hadn't contemplated distribution. They hadn't contemplated the need to hold inventory. So when you ordered the book, sometimes they didn't have it, they didn't know where it was, it went forever to get it. More insidious is they would get stuff in that they had ordered from the distributors, sometimes 4 and 5 times, and they just threw it in the room. Returns would come back. They didn't know how to, the concepts of restocking. They just threw it in the room. Amazon over the last 2 to 3 years has spent hundreds of millions of dollars doing what? Recreating Barnes & Noble by having regional distribution centers and changing the process because the processes that was developed wasn't working. So again, it's more than just putting a pretty face on it, putting lipstick on the pig, so to speak. You better change the fundamental behavior of the business. B2C. There are basically 4 elements or phases that people go through. First is product identification. You, the consumer, start to search for something you want. Gee, I want to buy a DVD player for the house. So you begin to go out and search for DVD players. You then do a catalog search where maybe you locate potential people to buy it from and get information. It could be Best Buy and a few other places that are even here locally in town, but you'll go to their website potentially, and begin to do some information searches. You'll then do some comparisons. Different brands, different models, what are the feature differences? Or same brand, same model, 2 different Sources, price differences, delivery options, warranty, returns. You can do all this from the comfort of your easy chair where, as recently as 5 years ago, first of all, you either got in your car and you went around town if the product was available, and Amarillo being a smaller community, quite often you couldn't compare the same product from two different vendors because they differentiated by carrying different brands. So you couldn't find the same thing and do a true comparison on price. You could try to compare features of two different brands, but not price for the same exact product from two different places. Or there was still, in some cases, classic mail order, where you could try to do some comparison, but then you still had the issue of getting on the phone, maybe talking to an operator who had some idea of what was going on, or it could be purely a call center that all they needed to do was take an order. If you had a question, they couldn't answer it. Finally, you engage in a purchase. And that purchase does not have to be online. You could have done all of the first three, made your decision, and then gone to your local retail establishment to buy it. Why? You like the convenience, you know the merchant, you like the ability to know how to return it. We talked earlier, returning something required over the net can be somewhat of an issue. You have to get authorization to return it, who pays for the return, all of these types of things come into place. So a lot of people, it's still a hassle. So, but I've done all my research, but if I know I can get it, and the best price can be at Best Buy, or that Best Buy will honor a price that I can document from some other alternative, then maybe it's just as easy for me to go to the local merchant and buy it. So that's where I talk about how do you fit in your business. You know, there is still a role without necessarily having to be trying to sell to the whole universe. B2B is a little different because the process is different. The end result is the same, but the process is a little different. First, we have the requisitioning phase. That's where an employee in the purchasing department or some function, if the company's not large, may not have a purchasing department, but there is usually one or two people, even in small organizations, who are responsible for creating a requisition to buy something that the company needs from a supplier. They may even over the internet now, what they'll do is a request for quote. They'll go to 3 or 4 of their trading partners and say, we need this. You are all recognized or established vendors that we do business with. We want your quote to provide that. And that can come in electronically. Finally, there'll be a purchase order that may be generated electronically. Now, this is where the true remove the fiction. No paper. We're doing all this electronically now. This can be some of the benefit and one of the big benefits of the B2B cycle and why its size is so large. Because large companies, the auto industry, as an example, has recognized that there are billions of dollars literally wasted every year in the generation of paper and the movement of paper and all of the other, and the people required to take the piece of paper, print it, put it in an envelope, and stop and think about that. What did I just say? Print a piece of paper. Well, where did they create the purchase order to begin with? Probably on a computer somewhere. They then turn around and they print it to a piece of paper, fold it, put it in an envelope, mail it. Then it comes somewhere, what do? They open it up and then re-enter it into a computer. So on the B2B cycle, this whole thing of doing it electronically is removing billions of dollars potentially from the system in the way of waste and friction. Finally, the payment can be processed, and that can be as basic as an actual check being cut or through a key card, a purchase card. You see more and more organizations that are getting these cards that allow the employee to deal directly with the supplier through a smart card or some type of an EDI or EFT transaction. EDI for electronic data exchange, EFT for electronic funds transfer, where money is just moved. Anybody here, or how many people in here today do electronic payments even out of the home? Electronic banking. You don't write checks anymore. It's catching on. More and more people are beginning to do it. That's just EFTs, electronic fund transfer. You are authorizing the movement of money. And has the bank sort of tried to encourage you to do that? Yeah, they'll give you a break on servicing fees, or maybe they'll provide you interest on the checking account with lesser balance. Why? Because moving paper checks around the system is expensive. So the banking system is interested in trying to remove friction. And that's sort of a comparison of the two processes. We're going to could move out, go to a number of different places. Final purchase, that's the B2C that we all know. B2B, requisition, request for quote, vendor selection, they come back around, purchase order cut, payment, and then payment back. So the processes are similar, but what the whole intent in the B2B space really is focused around efficiencies, less around convenience. It's centered around removing cost, removing waste from the process. However, when people do talk about internet commerce today, most of them are still talking about B2C commerce. Because that's the stuff that we hear about. It's the Amazons, the eBays, the CD Nows. These are the companies that have the awareness. Unless you happen to be buried into the business section or an avid reader of the Wall Street Journal, and you see the business transactions going on, the stuff that makes the popular press focuses more around the consumer interaction. An interesting quote by Nicholas Negroponte: "The world is made up of atoms and bits." And this wasn't sort of a physics lesson. This is the business school, not the science side. But really, it's saying that if you're selling bits, the internet represents the greatest single transformation opportunity in your business, ever. If you're selling atoms, on the other hand, the internet is a great place to catalog and to set up order forms, but it's really hard to ship atoms down a fiber optic line. You're not going to buy a car and efficiently and have it delivered. I mean, you're not going to sit here at your terminal and hit enter and poof, the Saturn shows up. It just doesn't happen that way. So really, the overall ability and utility of the net is a function of what are you doing. And you need to understand that, because if you don't understand what your business is all about, you can really be kind of disappointed in what your expectations of behavior is being. In the case of the Amarillo Economic Development, they are selling ideas. They're selling information. So for them, it's a very effective medium. Matter of fact, it's probably the most effective media that they've ever encountered, because it allows them to extend their reach far beyond anything that they could have done even as recently as 5 years ago, and make Amarillo known. If you're discount tire here in Amarillo, it's not nearly as powerful a tool. Because again, there's a discount tire in Lubbock. Different people, same name. You're not going to take business from the one in Lubbock because you happen to be on the internet here in Amarillo. So if the existing business involves products that cannot be shipped electronically, use the internet for what it does best. Communicating with customers, giving out product information, and smart companies are doing something here. They're doing unbiased product reviews. In other words, they're taking a chance. They're letting customers or other people maybe even put negative reviews about a product or service they're selling. What we talked about earlier, Dr. Anwar was talking about the concept of trust. Well, trust is a hard thing to establish between faceless electronic entities, because trust is based upon relationships. Well, one way to help establish trust is being willing to open yourself up to a possible consumer and maybe say, you know, somebody didn't like what we did. You may have take the right of putting that there and then take the right to go one step further. We learned from that. Based upon this negative bit of feedback, this is what we're doing in our business to correct that. So what could be a negative, you can very well turn to your positive. So you need to look at how you establish that trust. And then finally, for taking orders. And one of the frustrating experiences my wife had this Christmas is I'm a trained chef, and that's what I like to do on the off hours. And there was a particular cookbook. I had been to a restaurant with this chef a couple of times, and I knew it was writing a cookbook, and we were waiting for it to be released. And she finally saw it released. And ironically, the day she went to Barnes & Noble and bought the book, I had been on Amazon looking for something, and I saw that the book was available. And I came home and I said, gee, you know, that cookbook I wanted is available on Amazon.com, but I didn't order it because of something else, some other reason. She said, well, she sort of got this smile. It was a little before Christmas, and she said, well, I bought you the book. And I said, well, wasn't even on Amazon. I was on Barnes & Noble's webpage. And it was on the Barnes & Noble webpage for about $5 less. So I said, gee, call Barnes & Noble. You should be able to get a credit. You know, she called Barnes & Noble and said, you know, I just bought the book this morning. I paid $29.95 for it. My husband was at your website during the day, saw the same book for $24.95. I'd like the credit. You know what their answer was? No. You want the $24.95 price? Bring the book back, return it, and order it through the website.
Yeah, they run them as separate businesses.
They run them as separate businesses. But what did that do to me, the consumer? Put a pretty poor taste in my mouth.